of a beginner's guide to constructing the universe.
Now we have to work out what that message means. Maybe once we look beyond the conventional histories, there's a new truth to be discovered.
Here are the facts. Around 3000 BC, dynastic Egypt appears almost out of nowhere. Artistically and architecturally, it starts simply. No stone structures, but massive mud brick tombs, and small but accomplished stone and ivory artifacts. Yet it would appear that the sciences are already intact and fully developed. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, the complex enigmatic funerary texts. That knowledge is the legacy, and it takes but a few centuries to bring the execution of that knowledge, architecturally and artistically, to perfection. Unacknowledged and highly controversial, still older Kingdom Egypt, stretching back perhaps tens of thousands of years. This notion is dismissed, often ridiculed, by academic scholars of today. The Egyptian texts themselves talk about these long periods, thousands and thousands and thousands of years, when Egypt was ruled first by the Necheru, the gods themselves, and then, which I take realized human beings, godlike human beings, and then another long period when Egypt is ruled by the Shemsuhor, which means the companions of the followers of Horus. And the dates given, the Egyptians don't give dates in X number of years, but they actually list the names of the kings who ruled during these long periods and the regnal years. And if you add all of that stuff up, you end up with something like 36,000 years, which of course is unimaginable in the modern idea of how history begins and all the rest. Plausible suggestion that the Sphinx is meant as a marker of the age of Leo. Now, this is another hotbed of controversy, but there's a lot of reason to think that the ancients, very, very ancients, knew about the precession of the equinoxes and the shifts of ages, that goes, we're now at the end of the age of Pisces and coming into the age of Aquarius. And there's plenty of good reason to think that this knowledge of precession goes back into deep, deep antiquity. So if the Sphinx is actually intended as a Leo marker, it only gives you a couple of choices, because the last age of Leo is around 10,500 BC. This is the date chosen by Beauval and Hancock for dating the Sphinx, because everything else aligns. And then if you add to that the probability that the Sphinx is looking at its own image in the sky when it rises against the sun at the equinox, you've again got this 10,500 date. The problem with that date, as far as I'm concerned, is that in paleoclimatology, and this is, nobody disagrees with this, that the whole Earth is in chaos at that time, following the breakup of the Ice Age, which happens around 12,000 BC for reasons no one is quite sure. Schock's written a very good book called Voices of the Rocks, where it's a kind of a state-of-the-art statement on catastrophe theory. So everybody knows that this catastrophe took place. No one's sure why. That's when all the woolly mammoths died and the woolly rhinoceroses, all the mass extinctions, they're called the quaternary extinctions. All this took place. So, from my way of thinking, building all of this incredible stuff requires a long settled and stable civilization. You don't just build things like this in the midst of a worldwide, global, chaotic situation where there are earthquakes all over the place and huge floods and everything's unstuck. So, but nevertheless, the star alignments work for that 10,500 date. But because of these various, let's say, these mitigating factors, I don't like that date. But the only other choice is to push it back another full precessional cycle, which is effectively 26,000 years. That gives you 26,000, that gives you 36,000 BC, which corresponds to the Egyptian texts themselves. So even though it looks outrageous, particularly to an academic, to me, it's the more plausible of the possible scenarios, and it just remains to be seen, if we're able to actually date this thing. At least a few within the academic establishment saying, yeah, this stuff really has to be looked into. They're never going to say, yeah, we were wrong and you were right. And let's say, this is interesting, let's put some time and effort into trying to get behind it. We'll see what happens.
The inventory stela records a fact that unravels the traditional dating of the Sphinx. It records that the Sphinx appears to have already been a sacred and venerated monument at a date when its supposed builder, Khephren, had yet to be born.
This is the so-called inventory stela, which tells that Khufu, Cheops, built a temple to Isis alongside the Sphinx. Meaning the Sphinx is there in Khufu's time and it's not built by Khephren. Well, he was the pharaoh before Khephren who built the Great Pyramid, so that in and of itself means that the Sphinx is there in Khufu's time. So when did it get built then?
Wow.
The way that the academics weasel their way out of this is that studying the stone, studying these scratchy hieroglyphs, they find that the language is actually late. It's late period hieroglyphs. But the late period was consciously trying to, it was kind of a retro dynasty. They were consciously reviving the styles and all sorts of, all kinds of Old Kingdom iconography and Old Kingdom sculptural styles and artistic styles. They were deliberately reconstituting. The language had, of course, changed. So to argue that this is a late kingdom, sort of a late kingdom invention, really begs the issue. Maybe these are heirlooms from that earlier period. These guys in the center, that's sort of interesting. For those who think, these occur here and are, to the best of my knowledge, nowhere else in Egypt, again, ever. And okay, they're mythological animals. There are some people who think, gee, this is a long, the dinosaurs lasted longer than anyone thinks. And that if you're trying to draw a dinosaur by memory, well, who knows? Who's unified Upper and Lower Egypt in dynastic times. Normally said to be a victory over the enemies and all this sort of stuff, and as I mentioned on a number of occasions, the unification of Egypt is supposed to be a purely political measure. This is First Dynasty, supposedly, the beginning of the First Dynasty. You see the Hathor ears up ahead there. The Hathor face, again, already intact with the cow ears, and the human face with horns there, instead of normally with the Hathor head, you have the headdress and then the sistrum on top. This may be an earlier form, but Hathor is around from the very, very earliest time. Now, these guys in the center, that's sort of interesting. For those who think, these occur here and are, to the best of my knowledge, nowhere else in Egypt, again, ever. And okay, they're mythological animals. There are some people who think, gee, this is a long, the dinosaurs lasted longer than anyone thinks. And that if you're trying to draw a dinosaur by memory, well, who knows? I certainly would not like to get up in front of the American Society of Rationalists and try to defend that point of view.